Welcome. I'm your host, Susan Graw. Join me for an extraordinary journey that surpasses the boundaries of the unknown. I offer insights into this life, the afterlife, near-death experiences, and healing for the soul. You'll receive answers to the questions about where your loved ones are in spirit, and a clearer understanding of where we go when we leave this consciousness. The truth of life and the afterlife will be revealed. Join me right here, right now on Infinite Life, Infinite Wisdom. What the dying see before they leave. Welcome back to Infinite Life, Infinite Wisdom. I'm your host, Susan Graw. And today we're going to talk about something that every human being will one day face, yet almost nobody wants to talk honestly about: death. Not in a clinical way, not in a cold or frightening way, but in the deeply human way that I've witnessed throughout my life and my work with hospice. Today's episode is very personal to me because before many people knew me publicly, before books, before stages, before television appearances, I spent time working around the dying. I sat beside hospital beds. I listened to the final breaths. I did 11th hour work. I watched families unravel and come together at the same time. I watched fear leave people. I watched people speak to loved ones no one else could see. I watched hardened men cry for their mothers on the other side. I watched people who had not spoken in days suddenly sit up and speak with startling clarity. My father did that. He wasn't speaking and then he just sat up. It's called rousing. I can tell you honestly, there's something sacred that happens near the end of life. I know you've heard it before, but I want to talk more about it because something changes. And whether someone interprets that spirituality, medically, emotionally, or energetically, I think we have to stop pretending these experiences are meaningless simply because they make us uncomfortable. They're not meaningless. They have massive meaning because death is not only a medical event, it's also an emotional event, a spiritual event, family event, a soul event, most importantly. I think many people who are dying begin seeing beyond this world before they leave it. And in fact, that's been my experience over and over and over again with hospice. So today I want to walk you through stories, patterns, moments, things I witnessed, things families shared with me, and what I believe these experiences may be teaching us about consciousness and love, and what happens when we leave the body. So if you're listening while grieving someone or sitting beside someone dying or terrified of death yourself, I want this episode to hold your hand just a little bit because death may not be what we are taught to really think it is. We're taught it's fear. We're taught to fear it. I remember one of the first deaths that truly changed me, not because the person died, but because of how they died. She was elderly, very weak. The family was exhausted, and the room felt really heavy for days beforehand, not just that day. Not dark, just heavy with anticipation. You could feel everyone holding on. You could also feel the spirits in the room. It was dense, it was foggy, it was moist in the room. It was heavy. And the family was trying to keep her here emotionally. She was trying to stay for them. And something else was happening too. She kept staring at the ceiling. She was looking toward the corner of the room. And at first, everybody dismissed it. I didn't, but they did. But eventually, she began smiling towards that corner. And then one evening, this is the evening I'm talking about, she whispered, "My sister came." Now, our sister had been dead for years. So the family immediately started crying because they thought this meant she was confused. She wasn't confused, friends. And that's what stuck with me. She was calm. She was clear. She was peaceful. She described her sister's dress and her voice and her energy. And then she said something I've heard many dying people say in many different ways throughout my life. She said, "I don't have to be afraid anymore." Listen to how profound that is. I saw my sister on the other side, and I don't have to be afraid anymore. That sentence never left me because the fear had completely left her face. And I don't know one single person, including a medium, myself, who doesn't have some form of fear, at least of how they're going to die. So it's one of the most astonishing things I've witnessed repeatedly around the near death experience and the death experience. Fear, more often than not, leaves near the end. Not always, unfortunately, but very often and more often than not. People spend decades terrified of dying and then suddenly become peaceful. People spend decades being angry and suddenly they're not. People spend decades mourning and missing and grieving their loved one and suddenly the grief is gone. So when you think about that, they begin perceiving something the rest of us can't see, at least not yet. So anyone who's sat beside someone actively dying, which many of you may have, you understand this part immediately. The room changes. I know that sounds strange until you experience it. Time itself feels different, almost non-existent. The energy becomes almost suspended in air. Conversations become quieter. People instinctively whisper. Even aggressive personalities soften. There's this sacred stillness that enters the room. It happens in my office when I teach. And because the dying or the people who have passed are coming in. And sometimes right before death, it feels as though the dying person's no longer fully focused here. They feel like they're on another plane in another dimension or on the other side. They're going back and forth. They begin looking beyond the people physically present. It's as though they're looking right through them. I've watched people reach upward, smile at empty spaces, speak to invisible loved ones. And what's really fascinating is that these experiences often comfort them. Now, I think about that because they're seeing things that we say aren't there, yet they're feeling comfort. That matters. And I'll tell you why it matters, because hallucinations are usually chaotic or distressing. And these experiences are often rational, loving, organized, very personal. One man I sat with had been terrified of death his entire life. He talked to me for weeks about his fear of death, and I couldn't break it. He was terrified. And he talked constantly. He feared hell. He feared punishment. He feared losing consciousness. He feared leaving everyone and not seeing them again. But 2 days before he died, everything changed. He became incredibly calm and he started laughing softly to himself. And his daughter asked him while I was in the room, "What's so funny?" And he said, "Your mother keeps telling me I'm late." His wife had died 10 years earlier. And from that moment forward, I believe he stopped being afraid. That transformation was more powerful to me than almost anything I could have said to him spiritually, because something inside of him shifted. I remember when my mother-in-law was passing, and her and my father-in-law always bickered, but in a good way. You know, it was just the way they communicated. And she was pretty close to crossing. And she popped her eyes open and looked at me and she said, "Susan, I saw Walter," which was her husband, "and he was running the other direction." And she started laughing. I'm just hysterically laughing and saying, "He's not ready for me yet. I think he needs a longer break." Within a day, she was gone. That is the kind of experience they have. And by the way, that's a story we still giggle about because we can picture him going. So another pattern I notice, the dying often speak symbolically about travel. So I always say they're getting on the train or they're getting on the bus. And so it's very interesting to me that the dying speak in symbolic because they say things like, "I need to pack. The train is coming. The bus is coming. I'm going soon. They're all waiting for me. The gang's all here. I have my ticket. I need my shoes." They say things like that. And at first, families think these statements are just them being confused. And what we have to look at is the timing becomes impossible to ignore. We can't ignore that timing. I remember one woman repeatedly saying, "The boat is almost here, Susan. The boat is almost here," for 3 days. Then just hours before she moved on, she looked upward and whispered, "They came. They're here. The boat's here." And she died really peacefully shortly right afterward. Now, maybe the brain naturally uses symbolic language during transition. That's possible. But spiritually, I have to think consciousness may begin preparing itself to let go. Consciousness may be preparing itself to let go. So maybe the soul understands the transition through metaphor before the mind can fully surrender, because the soul understands leaving. The soul agreed to leaving before it came. Every one of us is going to do it. It's fascinating to me. It fascinates me how similar these symbolic themes are across all cultures. I've had all cultures that I've helped cross. 11th hour work is helping people cross. It's the cultures talk about crossing and traveling and going home and being met and light, movement, the bus, the train. Even though human beings are separated by religion and geography, they still describe remarkably similar experiences near death. How is that possible? This should really humble us. If you think about it, all over the world, they're having the same conversations when they're leaving, and yet they have completely different belief systems. One of the most common things people that are dying report to visitors and loved ones and staff is that they have visiting people or spirits, people that have crossed. It's almost always usually, well, sometimes it's people that are actually there, but most of the time it's the deceased loved ones, the parents, the children, the spouses, the siblings, their friends that have moved on. Many times it's their pets. So before anyone listening assumes this dramatically, most of these moments are incredibly gentle. They're quiet. So a dying person simply looking into space saying, "Dad's here." That's how it happens. Dad's here, out of the blue. It's simple. It's natural. And Dad's coming to pick me up. I got to get ready for Dad. I got to find my shoes for Dad. I think that simplicity is what makes it so profound. So when my dad was crossing over, he said to me more than once, "They're here." And I said, "Who's they?" And he said, "This woman and her daughter. They're here." And I said, "Who are they, Daddy?" And he said, "I don't know who they are, but I know I've had time with them before, but they're getting a little too close for comfort." And they disappeared. The next time they came, he was ready. And they were telling him, "Come closer." And he wasn't afraid anymore because he remembered who they were. And they happened to be a mother and daughter who died from AIDS, from transfusion years and years ago. And he had helped them financially, monetarily, helped their family. And the two of them came to him to help him cross. That's profound. He also saw his mother, who he hadn't seen in years and years and years and years. So it's so natural and simple that the simplicity is what makes it so profound. I sat with a woman who had not spoken clearly in nearly 2 days. Her breath was shallow, her eyes mostly closed, as she hadn't spoken clearly in 2 days. Suddenly, she opened her eyes really wide and looked around at the doorway, and she smiled. And I saw tears rolling down her face, and she whispered, "My baby." Now, everyone assumed she meant one of her children in the room, but she didn't. Years earlier, she'd lost an infant, and very few people even knew. But in that moment, she appeared to see her child, her baby. I still think about that often. It's quite profound because whatever was happening, it brought her peace. It brought her safety. It took away her fear. And this part astonishes me. There's something called terminal lucidity. And both hospice workers and medical professionals have witnessed this phenomenon repeatedly over and over again. Someone who has dementia suddenly becomes clear. Someone unconscious suddenly wakes up coherent temporarily. Someone unable to recognize family suddenly knows everyone in the room and not in the room again. So families often think they're getting better. Hospice workers quietly know this can happen shortly before death. And these moments are unforgettable. I have to pause here. Sorry, guys. They're truly unforgettable. One man that had advanced dementia hadn't recognized his wife in months and months. I'm talking months. And then one night, he suddenly became completely alert. He actually looked her directly in the eye and said, "You stayed." She collapsed crying. It was so sad and so beautiful, all in one swoop. And then he looked at each child and grandchild one by one and said goodbye and told them he loved them. Everyone in the room he spoke to. And then he died several hours later. Now, medically, there are theories, but emotionally, spiritually, these moments feel enormous, almost as though consciousness itself briefly emerges through the damage before they release. It's beautiful. I think this is the hardest part of today's conversation, but I think it's important. Children often approach death differently than adults. So I wasn't able to do the hospice work with children, but I have been with children who have crossed. They are less resistant. They are not in terror, at least existential terror. Many children describe seeing things adults can't see. They see a lot of angels. They see animals, grandparents, beautiful places that they wanted to see when they were sick or not here, and then they see light. One child described butterflies filling the room days before passing. Another one I had spoke constantly about a beautiful garden. Oh, the garden's so beautiful, and all the flowers are orange and red and yellow, my favorite colors. I remember thinking maybe children remain closer to where they came from. Children have not fully learned humanity's fear of death yet. So that made sense to me. Us adults teach a lot of that fear, as I've said in other podcasts. But while losing a child, it's one of the deepest griefs imaginable, by the way. I mean, there's nothing you can imagine worse. Many parents later tell me that childs themselves seemed strangely peaceful near the end. And that has always stayed with me. If you're losing a child and you see this peace, that's amazing. There are children that don't have that peace, or we don't witness that part of it, but they do have the peace. The dying teach us what matters. Honestly, it's rarely what society tells us matters. People don't ask for their trophies at the end, or followers, or status. They ask for people they love. Love's the connection, and they want that connection. Forgiveness, presence. Near death strips away performance, so only the truth remains. So as the closer they get to death, the less they're performing. They're standing or seated in truth. I think that might be one of the reasons so many dying people soften emotionally before they leave. I've had really harsh men soften so deeply over and over again, but the soul no longer cares about pretending. And if I've learned anything from hospice work, it's this: love is the only thing people truly carry emotionally at the end. Love and regret. That's it. Not money, not image, not achievement. Love given, love withheld, words never spoken. So love and regret. That's what remains. If you take anything from today's episode, I hope it's this: many people do not appear alone when they die. The last breath is not the last connection. Many appear comforted, welcomed, and met, seen, heard. And I think humanity needs to hear that, especially right now, because we're living in a world deeply terrified of death. And maybe death is not an ending the way we imagine it. Maybe it's a transition of consciousness. I happen to believe it is. Maybe love continues. I happen to believe it does. Maybe the reason so many dying people begin seeing loved ones before they leave is because no soul truly crosses alone. No soul truly crosses alone. There's also angels there. So if you weren't in the room with your father, mother, sister, brother, or child, they may have waited for you to leave because they weren't prepared to say goodbye to you. It comes from a space of love, or they felt you couldn't handle it, or they didn't want you to see them that last way. So I want you to know that they're crossing in the way that they're choosing. So there's no guilt to be held. They know that they won't be alone when they cross because they're already seeing people and angels and guides. No one dies alone. And death is just a metaphor for our hearts stopping pumping and our brains stopping working. It is not the death of consciousness. There is no such thing. So when you look up the definition of death, it's no longer existent. Well, that's not a truth for our consciousness. Our soul, our consciousness goes on. Thank you for sitting with me today. And if you're grieving and you're afraid, if you're caring for someone near transition, I hope this conversation brought you even a moment of peace. Till next time, take care of you. I loved our shared time together during this extraordinary soul journey on infinite life, infinite wisdom. Until next time, may the infinite wisdom we've uncovered guide you on your own unique path. Please don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss any new episodes. My book, Infinite Life, Infinite Lessons, is available now. Wishing you healing and love until we meet again. This is Susan Graw. Remember, they are only a heartbeat away. Take care of you.